In 2015, Fortress Press published a book entitled The Cross Before Constantine, The Early Life of a Christian Symbol. And in that book, I took on the consensus view that nowhere prior to Constantine do we see the cross as a visual expression of Christian devotion. This is a consensus view that is widespread in literature and is taught in courses left, right, and center. And it involves the view that the cross only became a symbol of artistic display within Christian circles only after Constantine became the emperor in the early 4th century, made Christianity the official religion of the empire, and needed symbols to foster his basically political program using a religion of unity to unite the people, to unite the empire, and symbolism was required as a part of that. And in the process, now that Christianity is an official religion, the cross becomes part of his political agenda. But it wasn't there in the pre-Constantinian period. This at least is the consensus view, and I think it's a myth that needs to be busted. There are two things that support the consensus view. First of all, it's the view that Christians were everywhere and always persecuted for their faith, and therefore would never put their head above the parapet, would never display visual art, or at least visual art that was so controversial, such as a cross, a despised symbol, something thoroughly anti-Roman, and therefore bringing even more persecution upon them just by exhibiting a cross. Other symbols were important in pre-Constantinian symbolism, such as Jesus the Good Shepherd and things of this sort, but certainly not a cross because of the issues and complexities of persecution. Another view that supports the consensus involves the absence of crosses in things like catacombs. You would expect when you go to the Roman catacombs to find the cross nestled in, sitting among the very places where the dead bodies were placed, etc., or in memorials of Christian dead, but you simply don't see the cross displayed in these kind of numbers that you would expect. So these two things have fostered and perpetuated the consensus view in a way that the consensus view makes good sense. The problem with the consensus view is it's wrong. There's problems with each of the two pillars that support it. First of all, it isn't true that Christians were everywhere and always persecuted. Persecution certainly was a feature of Christian existence in a lot of situations, in a lot of contexts. But there were peaks and valleys to persecution in the pre-Constantinian period. And so that sometimes persecution is quite severe, but in other places it's not, or in other contexts and other times it's not. And in those contexts and in those times, we find Christians rising to social prominence even as Christians. And we find that they are even displaying their Christian identity in public. So the argument that Christians would never want to be known in public as Christians simply doesn't work across the board. So we're working with a much more diverse context and contexts. Therefore, we have to imagine that maybe the argument that the cross would never be visually displayed simply is not something that we have to hold to, again, across the board. The other problem with the consensus view is that actually we simply do have depictions of the cross in pre-Constantinian realia. So even in the catacombs, where we would expect to find them in mass, we don't, but we do find a few. 4 or 5 crosses prominently displayed and prominently used to identify the person in relation to God and the crucified one. And moreover, we find it much more broadly than that. We find it on Christian rings, where the cross is displayed prominently with clear symbolism and clear nomenclature identifying this as a Christian symbol. We find it on Christian tombs, prominently displayed with the word Christian right there on the tomb. We find it on a Christian amulet where Jesus is depicted as crucified. And we find it in a number of other contexts. So again, it is not the most prominent symbol within pre-Constantinian Christian artistry or symbolism, but we find it in enough places that it is simply wrong to say that the cross was in a sense invented and as a means of political power by Constantine. It seems that what Christians were using the symbol of the cross for, when they did use it, was to identify themselves with this particular God, the God who resurrected Jesus from the dead to new life, and often sought the kind of protection that such a God of power offers to his devotees.